I've been told you can't do horror in a role-playing game. Now, this comes as a surprise to me because I've been doing it for decades. One of the biggest role-playing games in the world is Call of Cthulhu, a horror RPG. Some of the most powerful narrative tabletop game experiences I've ever had were in horror games like 10 Candles, Alice is Missing, and Trail of Cthulhu. I've been told you can't do horror in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, that's trickier, but I've done that too, many times. So it clearly can be done. The question is, how? The first thing to understand is that horror in an RPG is not going to be exactly like horror in a film, or a book, or a graphic novel, or even a Halloween haunted hayride. There are things those mediums can do that you really can't do at a gaming table. But on the other hand, there are things you can do in a role-playing game or a storytelling game that you can't do anywhere else. The fact that the players aren't just a passive audience, but are active participants in the scenario, allows you to achieve visceral, emotional, personal reactions that are completely unique and deeper and unlike anything else you'll experience anywhere. These are experiences that can stick with you and your players for years and years. And they all start with the one thing that you absolutely must have for horror to work at the gaming table. The players have to care.
I wonder if he really cares about anything. Or anybody.
I care.
They don't have to care about everything, but they do have to care about something. Their own PC at a minimum, the whole group is better. Other stuff in the game world, that's ideal. As a horror GM, your first job is to know what your players care about, because you are going to be targeting what they care about and threatening to destroy it, to take it away. That is the essential key to running horror games. And importantly, note that what we're talking about is what the players care about, which may or may not be the same thing as what their characters care about. But the players have to care. If they don't care about something, then they cannot fear its loss, and none of this is going to work. Which of course raises the question of how you can make the players care about something. And the truth is that ultimately, you can't make them do anything. Caring about something isn't something you can force someone else to do. Of course, there are certain things you can do as a game master to encourage your players to care, but this is a vast topic that's probably beyond the scope of this video. Hit the subscribe button and leave a comment if you'd like to see me tackle that in the future. But for today, what this largely boils down to is sincerity. If you take the game seriously, and the players take the game seriously, then caring about what happens within the game world will kind of just happen. This usually follows something I think of as the pyramid of care. At the bottom of the pyramid is the player's character. This isn't unusual at all. It's pretty easy for players to get attached to their own character. It's something they've created. It's their window into the game world. They may have spent dozens or hundreds of hours playing them. They certainly don't want their character to die. Now, one step up from this, the player will start caring about their character's stuff. They'll start by wanting a cool new magical sword, or to run their own detective agency. And then, through hard work, they'll get that stuff. And having gained it, of course, they will not want to part with it.
After all, why not? Why shouldn't I keep it?
If you're lucky, then some or all of your players will rise above these purely self-centered cares. They will begin to care about the world around their characters. This will likely begin with the PCs being played by the other players. They are, after all, attached to real people. But the real alchemy happens when the players start caring about the purely fictional elements of the game. The NPCs, the factions, the locations. If you and your players can build up a full pyramid of care, it will greatly enhance any campaign you choose to run. But for a horror game in particular, a completed pyramid of care means you'll be going in fully loaded as a game master, with every tool and option at your disposal. Now, as long as you have any layer of the pyramid, though, even players who only care about their own characters, you can still make a horror game work. It'll just be a little trickier. Now, this does mean, though, that there's one thing that is complete poison to the horror gaming experience. That's the player who won't take the game seriously. And this attitude is unfortunately infectious. Once you've got one player checked out from the game, it's pretty easy for them to pull the whole group into the gutter with them. Now, this can sometimes be a tough issue to diagnose. For example, let's say you're running a horror game and the players are cracking jokes around the table. Is that a problem? Not necessarily. It's okay if the players are using jokes to distract themselves from the danger. That's part of horror. It actually shows that they're so invested in the world that it's making them nervous. They're using humor to try to cope with the tension. But If the players are using jokes to distance themselves from the game world, or to ridicule it, that's a problem. Those jokes de-invest the player's engagement. There's a thin line between Buffy and the Scooby Gang cracking wise and the Mystery Science Theater 3000 crew mocking a movie. Long story short, if you're running a horror game and you're having problems with disruptive behavior, then it's useful to step back and have a group discussion about expectations. It's easy, though, for this conversation to go the wrong way and start focusing on things like no laughing or horror is a serious business, so everyone put on their frowny faces. This is at best ineffective. It can also easily backfire. It's more useful in my experience to drive to the heart of the matter and ask them, why don't you care? For now, though, let's put our pyramid back together. The core of the horror experience boils down to threatening the stuff your players care about. Threatening to kill them is always a viable target. Although, oddly enough, threatening to maim their character is often even more effective. And if you've ever played old-school D&D, then you know the true terror of level-draining undead. Maybe this is because if you kill a PC, they can just roll up a new character. But if you hurt their character, well, then they need to live with it. People say I would rather die for a reason. There's some primal human psychology at play here. If they care about their fancy armor or their bastion, that's great too. Threaten to destroy them. That's why stuff like a rust monster can strike fear in even the most jaded hearts. Of course, threatening to do these things to other PCs can be just as effective, which also means that simultaneously threatening multiple PCs can often be exponentially more effective.
I'm going to die!
You can see how rapidly your options multiply as you move up the pyramid. The more things your players care about, the more things you can put at risk. It becomes a target-rich environment, and the more targets you have, the easier it becomes to threaten them. And the reason I keep saying threaten is because that's the important bit. If a rust monster destroys your magic sword, you might mourn its loss. Losing it might make you angry, but you're no longer scared of losing it. You can't be. It's gone. Now, this isn't to say that you should never kill a character or destroy something they care about. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But when it comes to horror, the threat of loss, the anticipation of loss, is often more effective than the loss itself. You can be absolutely terrified and still live to scream another day. Plus, if you take away everything they care about, or just burn them out by destroying too many of the things they care about, you can literally kill your campaign. It may stagger on as a husk of its former self, but it'll be utterly dead inside.
I am dead inside.
So you're ready to start threatening your players. That's generally going to boil down to some combination of danger, helplessness, anxiety, and enigma. If you perceive yourself to be overpowered by something that wants to harm you or the things you care about, then you are in danger. This is the teenager being chased by a guy with a chainsaw. Now, the matchup doesn't have to be hopeless, but the players have to believe that the peril is real, that they can lose the fight, that they can't save their friend, that they can't stop the horrible thing from happening. Being in danger is often associated with a lack of power, and this can lead to the assumption that horror becomes impossible if characters have a certain amount of power. You can't do horror with superheroes, or D&D characters, or colonial marines in a warship armed with nuclear weapons. The reality is that the amount of power you have is only relevant because it influences your relative power, and even relative power is only meaningful because it affects perceived power. As a GM, therefore, you want to frame scenes that will highlight, emphasize, and even create this imbalance of power. Now, some monsters will have a reputation that precedes them, and when the red dragon unfurls its wings, every 5th level character knows they're in trouble. For other critters, you'll want to make sure to clue the players in. That might be finding huge footprints, horrific environmental damage, or the corpses of high-level adventurers before they ever even see the bad guy. In other cases, you can send a more direct signal. That might be dealing a terrifying amount of damage in a single hit. Or, in D&D, it might be as simple as casting a single high-level spell. If the wizard serial killer can cast Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, after all, well, that means their next spell could just as easily be a Chain Lightning, Finger of Death, or a Disintegrate. Another good tip is to aim this demonstration at something other than the PCs. To put the fear of Strahd in the players, for example, you don't need to have him attack them directly. Just let them be witness to him absolutely destroying a Barovian villager. It'll get the job done. Another technique is to scale up the demonstration. Frame up an incredibly tough fight with just one monster. Wait for the PCs to barely squeak out a victory, and then tell them 8 more are heading their way. Now, if a power imbalance doesn't actually exist, then mislead the players into believing that it does. If they believe the gas spore is a beholder, then the threat of the beholder exists regardless of the reality. Okay, so that's danger. If you're in danger and you see no way to escape or fix the imbalance of power, that's when you become helpless. This is an escalator, so seal the exits, strap them to the table, drop them into a maze, or cut them off from civilization. Broadly speaking, you create helplessness with obstacles. The obstacles either keep the PCs from reaching safety, or alternatively, they keep the PCs from the thing they need to save. Put them in a temporal loop that restarts whenever they leave the house where the ash things are hunting them. Or throw up a force field with their friend trapped on the other side. You can also create a sense of helplessness by disrupting the expected gameplay. Find ways for the horror to hit them in weird ways that bypass their normal defenses, or target their weaknesses. Trolls, for example, were terrifying because they regenerated damage. Players who'd gotten comfortable with stabbing stuff with a sword until it stopped moving were suddenly impotent. Now, this is less true now with trolls, of course, because everybody knows the gag, but you can use the same trick in a lot of different ways, including strange diseases, cybernetic parasites, psychic maelstroms, and other terrible things that bypass D&D's hit points. This is also how sanity checks work, creating a track of terror outside the quote-unquote normal damage mechanics. And once you've got the players worrying about what happens next, once they're not only reacting to danger, but concerned that danger or helplessness could happen to them, that's when they become anxious, which is our third pillar. This is a force multiplier. A werewolf that attacks you can scare you one time. A werewolf that you're worried might attack you can scare you over and over and over again. In Understanding Comics, Scott McCloud discusses the importance of closure. Closure is a fundamental part of how we perceive the world. We see part of something and our brains naturally fill in the rest. As McCloud says, our perception of reality is an act of faith based on mere fragments. As infants, we're unable to commit that act of faith. If we can't see it, hear it, or touch it, it isn't there. The game Peekaboo plays on this idea. Gradually, we all learn that even though the sight of mommy comes and goes, mommy remains. In an incomplete world, though, we depend on closure for our very survival. Closure is an incredibly powerful storytelling tool. McCloud goes on to say, you see that space between the panels? That's what comics aficionados have named the gutter. And despite its unceremonious title, the gutter plays host to much of the magic and mystery that are at the very heart of comics. Here, in the limbo of the gutter, human imagination takes two separate images and transforms them into a single idea. In a very real sense, comics is closure. Every act committed to paper by the comics artist is aided and abetted by a silent accomplice, an equal partner in crime known as the reader. I may have drawn an axe being raised in this example, but I'm not the one who let it drop, or decided how hard the blow, or who screamed, or why. That, dear reader, was your special crime, each of you committing it in your own style. All of you participated in the murder. All of you held the axe and chose your spot. To kill a man between panels is to condemn him to 1,000 deaths. We do the same thing at the gaming table. We provide a verbal description of what happens. Maybe we provide some visual aids. But ultimately, every player at the table performs an act of creative closure. The monster, the couch, the dress, the woman, what they ultimately see in their mind's eye is something that they created. This act of creation is fundamental to role-playing games, and it inherently draws the player in and immerses them in the game world. As a creative partner, they are invested at an incredibly personal level. And when it comes to the anxiety of horror, we can push this closure even farther. Imagine yourself walking down a shadowy hall lined with doors. You know the werewolf is behind one of them. Ultimately, of course, the werewolf only jumps out once, or maybe it never jumps out at all. But in the imagination, it jumps out 1,000 times. And with Enigma, our final pillar, we can leverage this closure even more. When confronted with the unknown, particularly a mysterious unknown, the players will try to figure it out. Now it's not just that a werewolf might jump out, it's that anything could jump out. A dozen different horrors, all conjured by the player's own imagination, lurk behind those doors. In fact, is there anything behind the door at all? With the proper circumstance and priming, when the players are properly paranoid, their closure will create the threat of danger or helplessness, either heightening the sense of anxiety or creating anxiety, even in situations where it isn't necessary. Even the harmless can become terrifying. Building on the 4 pillars of danger, helplessness, anxiety, and enigma, there are a number of shortcuts and multipliers you can use to create or enhance horror. Phobias, for example, have various sources, but they're all pre-trained fear responses. They bypass rational threat assessment and immediately trigger a sense of overwhelming danger. Now, to be effective, of course, this means targeting your players' phobias. If you're going to do this, it's probably more important than ever to use safety tools, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. Another option, if the players care about something other than their PCs, is to place the endangered thing at a distance. This danger at a distance reduces the perceived ability for the PCs to do anything about the danger, thus reducing their perceived power and enhancing their sense of helplessness. Modern settings are great for this because all you need to do is have the killer make a phone call, or show them on a live feed. On the other hand, you can endanger PCs from a distance, or in a way they don't understand. If they can't figure out how to apply their power to a mysterious danger, then they lose their perceived power. For example, in my adventure The Complex of Zombies, I introduced blood whites. These terrifying undead could cause nearby mortals to literally sweat blood. When the PCs could see the blood whites, they could fight them and destroy them. But when I put one of the blood whites behind a secret panel, suddenly all the players knew was that their characters were bleeding, and they had no idea how to stop it. You can achieve similar effects through dilemmas. If multiple things the players care about are simultaneously put in danger, ideally in different locations, being forced to choose which one to help or to save can create helplessness. Or alternatively, it might force the PCs to split up, which is also great for horror. It reduces the perceived power of the characters, and it lets you put isolated PCs at risk, creating danger at a distance for the rest of the group. You can use the unexpected to create quick enigma, disrupt the perception of relative power, or maximize the effectiveness of a phobia. Jump scares are a simple example of this, and I did a video about them last month, which you can find in the font of all knowledge down below. But another example of the unexpected might be xenomorphs climbing through the ceiling when you expected them to come through the doors. Priming is another technique in which you direct how the players perform closure on the enigmas you present. This can include clues and scene dressing. A haunted house is usually creepier than a sun-drenched beach, right? But it can also importantly include meta special effects in the real world. For example, horror movies often prime the audience through their soundtracks. Specific music cues or types of music, or even the lack of music, can prime the audience into imagining the worst possible outcomes for even the most innocuous of actions. You can do the same thing at the gaming table, playing subtle music to set the scene. You can also play around with things like light levels. It's just creepier playing by candlelight. In my experience, though, you usually do have to balance the effectiveness of moody lights and music against making sure the game is still playable. Fright will give way to frustration pretty quickly if the players can't see their dice rolls. Another trick is to simply mislead the players. Now, you hear something scurrying in the next compartment. Your motion sensors are going wild. It's right there! Oh, never mind, it's just the cat. These moments are another way of cranking up the sense of danger, even in moments where there's nothing to actually be afraid of. In an RPG, it can be as simple as calling for a die roll, or even just asking the players, where exactly are you standing? The ultimate reveal that there was not, in fact, anything to worry about in the first place is also a chance to relieve tension, which is also important when running a horror game. You can't keep the players on edge for 4 hours straight. They'll burn out. You have to relieve the tension so you can begin building it back up again. On the other hand, there's also the double reverse. Oh, good, that wasn't the monster after all. Except the monster's right behind you now. It's absolutely essential, though, that it's the character that's being misled. If you describe strange noises, it's because the character is in fact hearing strange noises. If you start lying to the players about what their characters are seeing, things are going to fall apart very quickly.
You lied to me. I trusted you.
Now, our final technique here is to establish ruthlessness. In order for horror to exist, the threat of loss can't be performative. The audience, in this case your players, have to believe that the threat is real. And the easiest way to make that happen is if the threat is real, which can be demonstrated by actually pulling the trigger, or swinging the axe, or blowing up the bomb. This can be very effective when dealing with problems created by genre expectations. There are all kinds of genres in which the main characters are placed in jeopardy but are never in danger of actually being killed, and this is particularly true of the pulp genres and TV procedurals a lot of RPGs are based on. And modern RPG design has ingrained the belief in a lot of groups that gameplay is supposed to be a predictable series of fair encounters. The expectation, therefore, is that the players will constantly be placed in a perception of quote-unquote danger, but will never actually be at risk. You're obviously never going to feel helpless if you know every encounter has been designed to assure your triumph, nor are you going to feel anxious about the possibility of facing the next so-called dangerous encounter. Horror, of course, becomes completely impossible under these conditions, and often the only way to break that long-held belief is to bluntly demonstrate that no, in this game, you and or the things you care about are not safe. In the movie Serenity, for example, there's a moment where Simon gets shot. It's the kind of, oh no, the hero's been winged by a bullet thing you've seen in 100 action films. But I vividly remember sitting in the theater and at this moment hearing a woman sitting behind me cry out, "Oh my God, he's going to kill them all!" It was like the words had been ripped out of her. And that moment, the deep-seated belief that the characters' lives really were on the line, that was only possible because Joss Whedon had already killed Wash and Shepard Book, two of the main characters, earlier in the film. He established his ruthlessness. The original Scream infamously did the same thing when they brutally murdered their biggest star in the opening scene. No one saw it coming, and it instantly established that nobody in the movie was safe, heightening every moment of anxiety and danger that followed. Wait a minute, you want me to just kill one of the PCs? Not at all. What I'm saying is that it's not your job to save them. But this is also why it's ideal for players to care about more than just their own characters. Kill their horse, burn down their house, infect their girlfriend with an alien parasite that permanently overwrites their personality. Because then when you threaten to do those things, or even worse things in the future, your players are going to take that threat seriously.
Oh my God, he's not bluffing! He's not bluffing!
We still have to discuss the most important part of running a horror game, but first, I'd like to invite you to RPG in the Jungle. Next year, in the spring of 2026, I'll be running an exclusive week-long RPG campaign at Citadel Fury, the world's only hand-sculpted gaming fortress in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. RPG in the Jungle is a pilgrimage to the world's most magical stage, a place where you don't just roll dice, you become the hero, your boots sinking into mossy earth, your breath mingling with the mist that curls like spirits around ancient ruins. I hope you'll join me for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. You can find links in the font of all knowledge below to book your trip now. But as amazing as RPG in the Jungle will be, it can be very easy for things to go wrong at the gaming table, particularly if you're running a horror game. That's why we need safety tools. Being a player in a horror RPG is very different from watching a horror movie or reading a Stephen King novel. When we're playing the game, we can't flip off the movie or put the book down. We're also literally participating in what's happening in a way that can make us a lot more vulnerable. We want to be scared, but we also want to have fun. The basic idea of an RPG safety tool is that it provides a concrete structure for the group to communicate what's okay and what's not okay. For example, John Stavropoulos' X card simply gives each player a card with an X written on it. If anything happens during the game that a player isn't okay with, they can simply tap or hold up their X card. Most of the time, the group can then just retcon, redirect, or skip past the problematic element. In rare cases, if it's not clear why the X card is being used, a short discussion should identify the issue and then play can continue. Now, a key thing is that the person invoking the X card doesn't need to explain themselves. The whole point is to give a simple, non-confrontational abort signal. This can also make the X card a great example of what makes safety tools so cool. See, the great thing about safety tools is that they let you take much bigger risks at the table. They're a safety net, and when you have a safety net, you can take chances. With safety tools in place, you can push boundaries with the confidence of knowing that everyone at the table is on the same page. A limitation of the X card, though, is that it can only steer you away from trouble after you've already stepped on someone's toes. This is where another tool called Lines and Veils comes in handy. Lines and Veils were created by Ron Edward, and the basic idea is that before play begins, everyone at the table indicates topics that will not be included in the game, no matter what. These are the lines you will not cross. This might be stuff like child endangerment, or spiders, or Muncie, Indiana. Veils, on the other hand, are topics which can be included in the game, but which should not be described in detail or dwelt upon in depth. When they come up, you should draw a veil over them and move on. After collecting a list of lines and veils from everyone, which can also be anonymized if the group likes, the GM should put together a master list and share it with everyone at the table for easy reference. With lines and veils setting your boundaries, and X cards backstopping to catch anything unexpected, you'll have a solid safety net for your game. Now, these are not the only safety tools you might find useful. I'll include some resources in the font of all knowledge that you can check out if you'd like to explore all of your options. One drawback of safety tools, though, is that they're inherently negative. They're all about the stuff that you don't want to be part of your game. Now, this can create kind of a weird bias towards negativity. Focusing exclusively on all the stuff you can't do can be kind of a bummer. So while you're doing your lines and veils, I also recommend having your players write their spotlights. This is a list of things they would like to see included in the campaign. It can help to keep these lists focused. Ask them to do a top 3 or a top 5, for example. You can also focus spotlights on specific topics. In a horror game, for example, you might ask them for their favorite phobias, or have them make a How I Like to Be Scared list, or a list of their favorite scary movies. Now, spotlights aren't an obligation. You don't need to include every single spotlight in the game. But spotlights give you a palette. Anytime you're looking for inspiration, you can just grab the spotlight list and see what works. I'll be doing more videos on how to use spotlights to run your best campaign ever, so that's another reason to hit the subscribe button. But for now, let's wrap up by talking about a couple of things you should not do when running horror adventures. First, don't tell your players that their characters are scared. We have an empathetic model of mind. If we see someone smiling, we reflect that emotion and become happy ourselves because we have circuitry in our brain designed to recreate the emotions we see in others. Horror films will leverage that to create fear in the audience by showing a character in fear. But just telling your players what their characters are feeling won't have the same effect. In fact, it can often psychologically distance them from those characters and have the opposite effect. What you can do is vividly describe the emotional reactions of NPCs and even act those out, particularly NPCs that you know the players care about. Now, the bandwidth is limited compared to a film, but the technique can still be effective. Second, never railroad the players into danger. Railroading is never a good idea, but it sure can be tempting in a horror scenario. I mean, after all, helplessness is one way of creating horror, and what could make the players feel more helpless than forcing them into a predetermined outcome? The problem is this helplessness isn't diegetic. It's not coming from the game world. So instead of being focused on the game world and the things that the players care about in the game world, it's focused on you, the guy sitting at the table with them. And this emotional redirection can disconnect your players from the game world, causing them to lose the investment that's foundational to the horror experience. In other words, they stop caring. And often the fear you want them to be feeling is replaced with frustration and even anger. It turns out that true autonomy, the players being in full control of their choices, often heightens the horror. It's only when choices matter that enigmas are fully engaged with, because the players know the outcome of those enigmas are not predetermined. I mean, in the most simplistic form, if they could solve this puzzle faster, then they might be able to save Lisa's life. But if they know that Lisa's doomed no matter what they do, then why care about the puzzle? When the players feel true responsibility for what happens, because what happens is the result of their choices, the guilt they feel for those outcomes, and importantly, the fear of experiencing that guilt if things go wrong, will enrich their emotional response to danger and helplessness. And that kind of emotional engagement, of course, will heighten the player's investment in the game world. They'll end up caring about more stuff, which will complete the cycle and expand the depth and breadth of the horror itself. And to begin this cycle anew, we begin with the pyramid of care. Identify what your players care about: themselves, their stuff, the rest of the group, the characters and factions and places of the game world. Then, put those things at risk, following our 4 pillars of horror: the danger of losing what you care about, the helplessness of feeling that you can't stop the loss from happening, the anxiety of fearing such helplessness could happen in the future, the tantalizing enigma which engages your players and sets them imagining an infinite variety of dangers. And then finally, use your shortcuts and multipliers to ratchet up the tension. If you'd like more tips for running horror adventures in your favorite RPG, remember to check out that video I did on jump scares last month. It's lurking down in the font of all knowledge. I'm also going to be doing video reviews of some really cool horror games later this month, so hit the subscribe button while you're down there to make sure you don't miss those. If you'd like to help support the team who make videos like those and this one, please consider becoming a member of the Alexandrian YouTube channel. Members gain access to a bunch of cool perks, including exclusive videos. Good gaming. This is Justin Alexander, and I'll see you at the table.